Hi, everyone. I'd love to welcome you all to DSS 2022. I'm Kannan, one of the co-founders at Yugabyte. And I have with me Sriram Samu and Valerie. It's my pleasure to welcome them both to this fireside chat. And let me give a brief introduction and probably want to hand over to them as well to introduce themselves a little bit. Sriram is VP of Customer Technology at Kroger. And Valerie is a principal solutions architect at Yugabyte that works very closely with Kroger among other accounts. But maybe Sriram, to kick things off, would love for you, since we have a global audience here, to give a little bit of overview both about Kroger and your role at Kroger.
Thanks, Kannan. Excited to be here. And thank you to everyone who's watching the show. So as Kannan said, I manage the customer technology team at Kroger. That includes all the customer-facing applications, the website, the native apps, the APIs, the API gateways. And I also do a lot of work on the data and merchandising side. So like all the pricing, the promotion, item setup, the space and floor planning, as well as the data management platform. Kroger, for the people who don't know, is the largest independent grocery chain in the country. We have about 2,800 stores across the country under different banners. So if you don't know Kroger, maybe you know QFC or Fred Meyer or Ralph's or King Soopers or Harris Teeter or many more, right? I don't want to go through all of them, but we are across about 38 states. And now we are rapidly expanding by going into new states with a partnership with one of the companies called Ocado, which is allowing us to build these very state-of-the-art robotic-powered fulfillment centers. So we just went to Florida about a few months ago, and now we are going into more states. So our goal is to, fresh is our theme. So we want to make sure fresh for everyone. So that is a theme that we work on. And we are truly in the food business. We don't do a whole lot of other things. We have pharmacies that really go in hand with the food that we do, and we have general merchandising and some other banners. But our focus is food, and fresh food for everyone is a theme that we go after. We are also big in the zero hunger, zero waste to make sure that we are living a sustainable ecosystem that we support across all the work that we do. And truly excited about the technology changes that we are driving within Kroger. Kroger, as you can see, has been around for about 135 years. So a lot of old and new mixed together. So our goal is really expanding the e-commerce offering, digitizing Kroger, and pulling ahead on technology which really powers all the underlying systems that we work with. So I'll kind of pause there and hand off to Valerie and let her introduce herself.
That was a really good overview of Kroger. And I thought I knew a lot about the Kroger business, but I just learned a bunch of things. I'm Valerie Parham-Thompson. I'm a principal solutions architect in our customer success org. And I've been helping application teams build that performant data storage underneath their applications for over 2 decades. For the past year, though, I've been working with Kroger. The Kroger teams build out Yugabyte and to prepare them to support the product going forward.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And Sriram, again, it was just so refreshing to hear about Kroger, and we're glad to be playing some small part in that journey along with you. As you know, we've been working together for many years, and it's a pleasure to have you back with us at DSS. So for those in the audience that may not be familiar with our history of Kroger and Yugabyte, if you could kind of give a brief overview of Kroger's journey with distributed SQL and Yugabyte DB, that would be wonderful.
Yes, Kannan. So I think we started about 3+ years ago, if I remember right. And so when I came to Kroger, we run most of our applications run on our 2 data centers that are in Cincinnati. So one of the goals that we had was to modernize the technology and start moving to the cloud and figure out what is the right operating model where we want to be. Do we want to be 100% on the cloud, or do we want to be a hybrid cloud? And eventually what we landed is we want to use the cloud as an enabler for our technologies, choose the best of the cloud provider. So we are running on Google GCP, we are running on Azure, on Microsoft Azure, and then we run a lot of applications on the prem. So the first 2 applications that we were looking at, I think that's one of them. We were looking at database solutions that will truly enable us to run on this multi-cloud, hybrid environment. And we were looking at shopping list as the first application. I think that's the one that we picked. So shopping list, for the people who don't know, is like you can create a shopping list and add the items so that when you go into the store, it'll tell you which aisle where you can find the item. We also nowadays have, and recently we launched something where it allows you to navigate the store. You can actually, it's almost like a GPS within the store. It'll guide you through the shortest path to buy all the things that you want to buy. So we started by deploying Yugabyte. I think we looked at many database providers at the time and eventually landed on Yugabyte with the goal that we would run them on GCP, Azure, and then eventually potentially on-prem, so that we can have one single unified ecosystem where we can run our data and compute. So we also chose Kubernetes as the underlying compute platform. So we want to really have this hybrid system that can run on any of the cloud providers or on-prem. We also, as we look into the future, we also knew that eventually we are going to run something in the store, and that is still being decided right now. So almost think about running on the edge some of the same technologies that we today run in cloud and data centers. So as we went through the process, I know we talked and figured out, we tested out on the shopping list, and I think now we have expanded to about 15 applications that we run on Yugabyte, and these are not, let's say, basic applications, right? If you look at some of the things that we run today, we run the cart, the checkout, the item attributes, customer, the enterprise customer, which is truly the customer, the database of all the customers at Kroger is now running on Yugabyte.
Totally, yeah. So in fact, one of the questions along those lines was, when you came to DSS last year, we sort of discussed how you got started with Yugabyte, right? And a year in, there has been quite a lot of increase in their adoption. I would classify you as one of the more mature Yugabyte DB customers in terms of adoption, consumption, and so on for a wide variety of applications. And obviously, one of the themes that is played to that's been on your mind is sort of the future proofing of your distributed data tier and how distributed SQL can potentially help there. So any insights gleaned over the last year as you've sort of gone through this journey from a starting phase to a more mature adoption? And you also touched upon some of the core apps and use cases that you have deployed on Yugabyte DB, but in that context, any insights you could share would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think I touched upon some of the topics, right? I think the maturity that we had is we started with GCP with a couple of applications there. Then we moved to AWS, sorry, not Azure. Please edit that out. So we started with GCP, and then we went over to Azure, and we are running on both the Yugabyte and our Kubernetes on both those systems. So I think the typical maturity curve for a developer going onto the cloud is they want to take what is running on-prem and plonk it on the cloud, and which really does not work really does not work very well. It is mostly not efficient. We end up spending a lot of money, and then there is a lot of training to get everyone to understand how each application is written on-prem and how it is running on the cloud. So we've been going towards, how do we standardize? Like, how do we make sure that the compute gets deployed the same way, the database setup and management is the same way? How do you understand scalability? Like, how do you run on multiple zones? How do we make sure that there is active on database? So it has been a maturing process for us as developers started going to the cloud, understanding not only how to lay out the data, but also manage failure, how to manage failover from one system to the other. So there's been a process, I think, which it took us a little while. I think the first couple of applications are really hard. And then the second thing we ran into is, how do you optimize the database? And I know we talked a lot, and as we did the enterprise customer, there were a lot of scalability issues, and we had people from your team, Valerie, I'm sure you were involved in that discussion, saying, how do we go scale enterprise customers? So I don't think anyone should expect that you can just take an application, move it to the cloud, take a bunch of developers who are not working on the cloud, put them on the cloud, and everything will be hunky-dory and working on day one. So it is training, it is standardizing, it is really finding a few experts who can understand and help the team. And I think that's where Raj, one of our senior database engineers, came in, who has been partnering with Yugabyte and saying, how do we get everyone standardizing? How do we make sure that we understand the profile of the application so that the data schema can be laid out the right way? So it is no one size fits all. It's a lot of understanding and going forward.
I mean, that resonates so much with me, and I'm sure it does with Valerie. In fact, I was going to ask Valerie, like, as somebody that's been working hand in hand with Kroger on many of these applications, what are some of these use cases that stand out to you, Valerie, in terms of like the journey or learnings that have come out?
Sure. And I see that you mentioned enterprise customer. That's been the most active application that we work with this year as they move to cloud, making those microservices, moving to Yugabyte. We've had good opportunities with them to design that SQL layer that you mentioned to size their cloud resources and to help them tune their performance. Another use case that I really enjoyed working with is inventory. So inventory is a really good scaling use case. They've scaled 10x this year from just a few of those stores that you mentioned to the full set of stores across the banners. Search was a unique use case just because of the performance requirements in the unique way they've implemented their service. And then CART most recently has been going through a re-architecture to meet those increased application resilience requirements this year. So we've worked with them getting some geo-partitioning set up. So these have all been very unique use cases across Kroger.
And I think just to add on to that, I think one of the things we are trying to do is like, what are the standard patterns, right? I know everyone talks about, application tiering, like what is tier 1, what is tier 2, and what is tier 3, and so on. But when you work on a customer-facing application like the one that we have, and Kroger is in the top 10 e-commerce sites in the country, pretty much anything that faces the customer is tier 1, right? I think there are very few pieces of that we can potentially club as tier 2. So really, when an application developer is saying, hey, I want to go to the cloud, we start the journey by having a cloud onboarding session where we talk to the team and say, like, what does your application do? What is the scaling that you want? And then truly kind of saying, like, you probably want to think about multiple zones, multiple, where do you want to put the data? How active, like, do you want active? And invariably, like, we have come across patterns that we are trying to get everyone to adopt out of the door, rather than saying, like, let me just get the application on the cloud and then I'll go back and redesign it. So that's where I think the database team has been really partnering with your team and also building the knowledge in-house and saying, like, how do we get something out of the door correctly? And then, of course, we have to balance that with time to market. So sometimes we do go out without active. We go out of the one location, but being very cognizant that that is the decision we took and having a plan to go back and fix it later on.
Makes sense. I think our audience would love to know a little bit more about one of the applications you mentioned as the most active application, like enterprise customer. Like, what does that app do? And it may be a question either for Valerie or Sriram, since I know you're closer to.
Yeah, I can take a cut at it, and Valerie can give you more details. So I kind of think e-commerce, there are 3 I's of e-commerce. Like, one is identity, one is item, and one is inventory. So like that kind of like, who's buying your products? What products are you selling and how much of those do you have? That kind of is the foundation of e-commerce. So enterprise customer is really the database or the system where we are tracking all customers who interact with Kroger. On our initial go around, we are taking all the people who come to the store or transact with us on e-commerce and creating a database that will not only work for the current use cases, but thinking ahead, like how do we build for all use cases? So I believe all the writes and about, I think, 30 or 40% of reads are actually happening on the new system that we have defined, that we have created. In the future, we're going to bring in new use cases like, maybe health and wellness. The pharmacy customers will come in, but they'll be separated from the core enterprise customer. We had to follow all the PHI requirements. And there are other systems within Kroger. So we'll start bringing in new domains within the same enterprise, but really having a global view of customers who interact with Kroger. And this has actually helped us truly understand the customer, like how many customers are actually interacting on a daily basis. How do we customize and personalize the experience for them? So this is a true foundation of everything that we do in terms of knowing the customer. And I think Valerie can give you exact numbers, but I would think that this is one of the bigger size databases that we have, which is actively touched upon. Like every time a customer transacts in the store or anyone logs on online, we are touching the enterprise customer database.
Definitely enterprise customer is showing up as one of the biggest data storage on Yugabyte here, and definitely very busy. I think that's why we partnered with them so much this year, is to make sure that that's running so well.
Thanks, Valerie and Sriram. Sriram, so now that you've had some time to feel and work with Yugabyte DB and a distributed SQL database, what do you feel are some of the biggest business outcomes that you've seen from adopting distributed SQL?
I think there are a lot of things, but like if I look at the non-functional requirements, I think it's really how do we focus on scalability, reliability, availability. I think that's like three things that I look for when we are looking to scale. And as you look at now, I mentioned Kroger is the 10th largest e-commerce websites in the US. That is increasing, right? We are seeing, even during COVID, we saw a big upsurge of people shopping online. But the great news has been even post-COVID, our e-commerce has been continuing to grow. And as we are rolling out Ocado and home delivery for groceries across the country, we are seeing more and more adoption. So we have customers who come into the shop, they are digitally engaged, which means they come in, clip coupons, check prices and plan their shopping, use the shopping list to plan their shopping. Then we have customers who come there to look at what do they want to buy, like maybe place a pickup order or a delivery order. Then we have customers who shop with us, maybe not on groceries, but they come and do pharmacy. Like, they have the prescription pickup, they get notification on prescriptions and so on. So truly, as we look at the database and the systems that we need, it's truly how do we make it? And we also operate across the country, right? So the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. So we want to build our system so that we have proximity to where the customer is, so that we can give better, minimize the latency. We want to be available all the time, running in multiple zones or multiple regions, so that the database doesn't go down. Unlike traditional e-commerce, grocery shopping does tend to be mostly during the day. Like, I don't think we get a lot of people placing orders at 2 o'clock in the morning, or we don't have the big Black Friday or Cyber Monday events, but we do have big events like any holiday like July 4th, Thanksgiving, Christmas. These are big days where customers are depending on us not only to have the orders go through, but also to make sure that the inventory is available, right? Nothing worse than placing an online order for like big cooking or a big dinner you're planning, then you don't get some of the items. So inventory availability, inventory accuracy is really important. Time slots, like being able to serve up the right time slot when the customer comes shopping, I think that is really important. So that scalability, availability are like really, really important for us in terms of making sure that the customer is happy. And the speed, I think I don't think anyone will say the site is too fast for me. So then to make sure that the digital experience is also at a speed that they expect. And these are some of the things that truly a distributed database where we can put as much data close to the customer, I think makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Sriram. In fact, I was going to ask Valerie, like one of the themes you probably commonly see with a lot of Yugabyte customers is the need for scale, right? But as it relates to Kroger, any interesting scaling challenges that we ran into, or from requirements perspective from certain applications, and how did we address them?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, inventory scaled 10x this year. As the inventory data was increased from just a few stores to support all of the banners. At one point, we had to scale very quickly. And through automation, the Kroger DevOps team, and this includes Victor and Eugene Chupkin, they were able to get the whole infrastructure set up very quickly. That team has just done a really great job around automation, and it's clear. The inventory team was comfortable enough with the speed of that scaling that they were comfortable being able to scale in reaction to load instead of leaving machines around, just with spare capacity. So I think that it was a really good scaling story. And inventory is continuing to scale as well. They're to support their DR, they're going to scale again this year.
And I believe I remember the back to school time, Sriram, I think about a year back or so, where there was a huge spike in traffic, and both being on the cloud as well as the database being cloud native made it very easy to handle that by simply increasing the capacity of the Yugabyte cluster, and it was back to business as
Right.
usual.
Yeah, I talked about availability, but the scalability, like I think we do get, there are pretty much any holiday ends up being a spike. You're making a big dinner, you're making a big lunch. I think those tend to be able to handle that spike is also really important. Valerie touched upon inventory. So inventory is really interesting because, there is good data modeling need to be done because, in theory, like you want to know every inventory update, but really in practice, you don't need to know every inventory update, right? If you're selling milk, you don't really need to know if the inventory went down from 100 to 99. You really want to know when it's going down a certain threshold where it makes an impact to an online customer or to any shopper. So getting the schema right, getting the design right, I think those are really important. And putting inventory is inventory is a huge impact. We are seeing accurate inventory making a big impact on sales. So making sure that inventory is available and accurate, I think that was a huge, huge step. And that is one of the exciting things that we did. I mean, when we rolled out inventory, there were some really difficult days when we were talking about, is it scaling or not scaling? And once we figured it out, I think that has been a big win.
And in a sense, if I remember correctly, it's enabling you to do new kinds of customer experiences. Like apparently, like now, if a customer goes and enters like a zip code and they're searching for, they enter the zip code of kind of where they're shopping. And now if they search for some item like diapers, you're not only able to show the items that match that particular search term, but look up nearby stores and based on a real-time check on the inventory, actually only display the ones which have valid inventory.
That is correct. So today we cannot go through this, I think we call this crawl, walk, run approach to inventory. So right now what we are showing is we are showing you inventory not only in the store that you're interested in, but in the nearby spaces. The next one is really like saying that if you're going to order a grocery, like, 3 days from now, we would start projecting like, what the inventory is going to be 3 days from now, taking into account the other transactions that are going on, and then maybe incoming supply chain, like inbound supply chain, bringing in more goods into the store. And then the run will be like when we are going to use a lot more machine learning in terms of predicting patterns and inventory levels, which will really make the experience for the customer much, much better, like inventory reservation, etc., which we need to implement. So inventory is one of those very interesting areas. Sounds very simple, like saying just keep count of how many things you have, but as you go into groceries and as you go into perishable items, it really becomes a lot more complex in terms of what you can project.
Totally makes sense. And related to that, Valerie, like you work with many different teams and application teams, say at Kroger. Do you see kind of like a unique set of asks coming from different teams, whether it is like related to topology of deployment, like multi-region versus single region, and trade-offs that these different teams are asking for?
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about the unique implementation of inventory. And it was very interesting working with that team because you're right, at the face of it, it seems like you would just keep count of the items. But the things that they were asking us around the data model, clearly they were thinking of very unique implementations to get to the core of the issue, not just a pure count. I think the search team also is coming up with some very creative implementations around predicting search. Many things that, again, I think at the face of it, you think will just maintain the dictionary of the things that you want to search for, but that's not what they're doing, right? So when they ask us to look at their data model or ask us to solve a particular performance issue or do some query tuning, it's very interesting seeing how they're solving those problems.
So Sriram, I think you, in your earlier conversations, you already kind of covered the importance of like multi-cloud strategy. Your set of applications are moving to Azure, set of applications are moving to Google Cloud. Are there also applications where you're actually adopting a hybrid posture where the same app is stretched across either on-prem and public cloud or across two public clouds?
That is a great question. And I wish I had a simple answer for that. So at this point, we are not really thinking about running the same application on two clouds, two external clouds. But we could very well start running an application on-prem and some on the cloud. And that is, again, one of the goals that we need to get. I think there's some early discussions going on saying, should we run Yugabyte on-prem? Where I want to go is really like saying, give us the flexibility to scale out from running on-prem onto the cloud when we need, and then when we don't need, maybe running them purely on-prem. But that is like a baby step we want to get to. I think as we mature and we can truly operate multiple systems which are almost the same, and from a developer's point of view, like if they need to code for on-prem separately from the cloud, I think it becomes really challenging. So the reason we think about running the same application on-prem and on the cloud is that latency, right? I think we are currently, like I would say, 80% of our applications are running on-prem and 20% on the cloud. And as we have this concept called swim laning, where we try to put related services together in a same location so that the latency between those services are really low. So as we go into the cloud, it's very, very likely, like item might be one, and as a made-up example, the item is pretty much required by every application. Similarly, inventory is pretty much required for every experience application. So running them both on-prem and maybe on Azure makes a lot of sense, where we can cut down on the latency of those applications. So one user request comes into a data center, we want that to stay in that data center or that cloud region and not kind of go hopping back and forth. So that is one use case, but we are not at the point where we are ready to pull the trigger. But that is a question that is going to come up. The bigger use case might be really like as we run on the edge, like do we need something to be running all within a store? For example, like you do a point of sale application, you want the price, you want the item information all in that store and not really have to go back to the cloud, unless more like you have a cache miss and maybe you go to the cloud. But in general, you want to hit as many things as possible within the store. So that is still in the early stages as we are thinking about how do we deploy on the edge. But that's, again, a couple of use cases where we think that we may run the same application in multiple areas.
Understood. So it seems like that's one of the things that you try to expand into as you look ahead in terms of what you would do with a distributed SQL database.
Right, absolutely. And that's a conversation I think we need to have probably 3 to 6 months from now, like saying, how can Yugabyte help us in some of these, the edge cases or running on-prem? I know we had talked about the on-prem a couple of times, but I want to reach a level of maturity where we can take pretty much any application to the cloud and run them on the cloud very efficiently, and then start thinking about how do we get the more complex use cases.
Thank you. And I want to go to Valerie for one question related to deployment architecture. Valerie, you've been on the Yugabyte side of things, helping Kroger build out a lot of their multi-region deployment use cases as well. This journey started with a couple of apps that were initially single region, but now we are well on the way to deploying multi-region deployment applications, right? So what has been key to success here, and what are the interesting lessons learned?
Right. So we have been working with the Kroger teams, primarily the software architects, David, and primarily, to come up with a design to support the applications being in multiple regions. We've had Yugabyte across regions, but one of the things we haven't had is the ability to support the applications in the separate major regions with very low latency. So recently we've been talking about setting up geo-partitioning that allows them not only to support that low latency, no matter where this is for the cart application, no matter where they're filling up their cart, but also if the cloud service provider has a major outage in the region, they will be able to support the low latency that we get without any outages.
Right. I think the interesting, just to add on to that, the interesting thing about groceries is local, right? You don't actually typically ship groceries cross-country. So there's a lot of locality in terms of customers shopping at a local store or from a local fulfillment center. So that gives us the opportunity to really take what is the right level of data, package them, and partition them, I shouldn't say package them, partition them the right way so that you can really make it as local as possible. I think that gives us so many advantages that Valerie talked about. I think we get the lower latency, but also if there is a failure, we should be able to use our application from another region and be able to continue running.
Thanks, Sriram. And maybe one question sort of a little bit along, in terms of choice of databases for different applications. How do you see this mix of distributed SQL and traditional relational databases in the future? Basically, do you see that distributed SQL has the potential to replace your traditional relational database for a lot of your new cloud native applications?
Certainly, I think the newer applications, it's a lot easier, and to go with the distributed SQL Yugabyte-like solution. But there are a lot of, if you think about Kroger, I don't think there is a single database that in existence that we don't use. Pretty much every database application that you can think of is probably running at Kroger in one of our applications. So the traditional SQL helps over there, saying it might be an easy migration without having to re-architect everything and the application to start reading a traditional database. I mean, there are some mainframe applications which I'm not sure that we want to go and re-architect all of them overnight. But if they are reading a relational database, I can think about maybe a transition path where we can move them to another relational database and get them migrated over to that, and then eventually redesigning them. So I kind of think that the short term, I cannot go out of the traditional relational database overnight, but longer term, if we redesign the application, I think that is a good time to look and see how do we go into a more distributed database.
And from our side, some of the things we have, as you know, our high level of Postgres compatibility with even support for features like stored procedures, triggers, all of the traditional things that you expect. Yugabyte, by reusing a lot of the Postgres code base for its query layer, is able to help that adoption of even existing applications, as sometimes we call it the brownfield applications, come onto this cloud native journey. And so that's an area we're looking to collaborate closely with your team. Absolutely. And that's something we have talked about. I think that's one of the attractive parts about Yugabyte, is that the Postgres implementation. So again, it's a journey. I think we should continue talking and seeing which are tactically where do we go and maybe migrate some of the older databases into the Postgres implementation. And then as we redesign the applications, think about what is the right database approach that we take. What we are trying to do is trying not to do is to force everyone to go down one path, because there is a spectrum of applications, and we want to give the developers and the team the right database, a fit for use database. So if they come back and say, this is the type of database I need because that is my application profile, we want to give them that database option so that it is available to them. So having 3 or 4 different patterns that they can go and take almost out of the box and run with it is where I would like to get to. Wonderful. And maybe before we wrap up, just a few rapid fire questions. So just, and it's going to most likely just be a kind of highlights or summary of points you've already made, but would still love to put them your way, Sriram. So let's get started. What are the main drivers that led you to distributed SQL? I think it is really the way the business is going and the needs for the future, the availability, scalability, reliability, going onto the cloud. I think that's what really drove us to this. And how have developers benefited from distributed SQL, your app dev teams? I think it simplifies their approach. I mean, we are trying to give some options, as I mentioned earlier, but I think all developers want to use and learn new technology. So I think the distributed SQL provides them from their intellectual challenges. I think it helps them. From a business challenge, it provides us the scalability and availability and reliability that we are looking for. Scalability being a huge factor with the distributed SQL. And I think the new business models is a third one, I would say, is that I think it allows us to go and build new business models on the cloud with the kind of technologies that we want to adopt for the future. Exactly, without having to worry about sharding and manual sharding, all that. And final question, your biggest advice or words of wisdom to somebody considering Yugabyte DB? I think it's really, you need to understand your business application. You need to understand your developers' maturity. So it is one thing to say, let's go and start using a database or a cloud or whatever overnight, but you need to kind of put the building blocks in place, go through the training, because not all databases, not all clouds are the same. So it's really, how do you prepare for it, understand your profile, understand the database. And then I think actually partnering with you guys, and I think it's been a learning process for us. I think Valerie, will vouch for it, but as we went through the journey, it is a learning. We went with certain assumptions, how everything is going to work. And then you find out, no, we didn't think about certain things. So it's really stepping through that, having a plan to do the training and learning for the engineers, understanding the business profile, what do you want to build for the future,
relaying out the data sometimes is very hard. So really understanding like what you're building, I think that is important. So planning, I would say, is really important.
Thank you so much, Sriram and Valerie, both of you, for your time. Sriram, I know when you speak, it comes with a lot of years of wisdom, not only as a practitioner, which you have been at many places in leading companies, eBay, PayPal, Walmart, Kroger, but prior to that, you've always also been a builder of databases at Oracle. So thank you so much for sharing some of those glimpses. Likewise, Valerie, you had a lot of practical experience working with customers across many organizations. It's really great to have you on this call as well.
No, thanks, Kannan. And truly, I mean it when I say that it's been a great partnership. And I know that I'm no longer capable of building database technology. I'm more a user right now. So I think you guys bring in the technology that we need for the future. And it's been a 3-year journey. And I feel as we build more and more applications, take them on the cloud, we will lean into you to kind of enhance your systems and help us to adopt the best practices and build our solutions in a way that will scale for the future. It is an exciting journey. Digitizing a company like Kroger is not a small challenge, but I think we are making great progress, and I think there is a fantastic talent on both sides, on our side and on the Yugabyte side, who has made it successful.